Good morning and welcome to the River to Sea TPO Environmental Justice Workshop for the Connect 2045 Draft Cost Feasible Plan. My name is Colleen Nicklin and I'm a Senior Transportation Planner for the River to Sea TPO and the Project Manager for Connect 2045. Materials associated with this webinar can be accessed and downloaded through the handout dropdown. We have 3 handouts that are available for download. I'd like to introduce you to the workshop team. You'll be hearing our voices throughout the presentation. Again, my name is Colleen Nicklin, and I'm a Senior Planner with the River to Sea TPO. Also on the line is the TPO Executive Director, Lois Bolenbach. Our consulting team with Kimley Horn and Associates is represented by Mr. William Roll and Mr. Jim Wood. The purpose of the webinar is twofold. One is to provide an overview of the development of the TPO's long-range transportation plan, which is also called Connect 2045, and to present the draft cost feasible project list that was approved by the TPO board at their June 24th meeting held last month. The second purpose is to receive your input. Environmental justice is an essential component to the development of this plan, and we are here today to hear from you and your organization regarding this plan. Environmental justice is the fair treatment of all groups within the community. The importance of environmental justice is defined through multiple directives and laws which direct every federal agency to make environmental justice part of its mission by identifying and addressing the effects of all programs, policies, and activities on traditionally underserved and underrepresented populations. Environmental justice not only provides a framework for conducting assessments pertaining to matters of equality and non-discrimination, but it also provides the forum to discuss community needs, opportunities, and challenges as it pertains to transportation choices. So during this workshop, how do you provide comments? During the presentation, we'll have all attendees on mute. Following the presentation, we'll unmute all attendees and you can provide comments verbally. If you prefer, you can also provide comments through the question drop-down on the right-hand side of your screen. Comments can also be submitted after the workshop. We ask that comments be submitted by August 24th. Additionally, following the webinar, you'll receive a comment card in the form of a survey that you can also fill out and submit. Comments additionally can be submitted directly through my email, which is shown on the screen, or through the Connect 2045 website, which is a website specifically dedicated to the development of this plan. Now I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Jim Wood.
All right, good morning. Thank you, Colleen. The River to Sea TPO is the designated agency that's responsible for the planning, the prioritization, and the programming of funds in this plan area, which you see in green here, which is Volusia, all of Volusia County, and then Eastern Flagler County. So the TPO sets important priorities for major capacity projects, as well as various programs that address multimodal, safety, operation, and other components of the network. And the TPO is governed by a board that's made up of elected officials from each municipality within the plan area, so the counties and the local governments. Connect 2045 is the new long-range transportation plan being developed to guide the transportation future in this area. And it is a 25-year plan. These plans are updated on a schedule of every 5 years, and it identifies strategies that help to meet the needs within the TPO plan area. And it provides a good opportunity to reevaluate the plan of priority projects based on emerging trends, changing transportation demands, and then evolving community needs as well. One of the first steps in developing the plan was to develop goals and objectives. And what you see here are the 6 core goals. And then under each of these, there's a series of objectives. We show these goals here to give you the full view of the types of things that are being considered and looked at. These goals serve as the policy direction for the approach to the planning and prioritization, and they represent these various issues from economic development to livability to connectivity. So it's a series of things that are critically identified that are important to the overall process. As part of the development of Connect 2045, we analyzed 3 alternative scenarios to aid in the development of the plan. And these really focus on 3 key themes that have been important starting in this process and continuing throughout. The intent of the technology scenario has been to identify and prioritize potential corridors for future technology infrastructure improvements that are divided into short and mid and long-term needs, but looking kind of generally at what technology means. And so part of what we'll look for in your responses as we talk a little bit later are possible technology considerations that might be of interest to the populations and residents that you are serving and advocating for. In looking at the resilience scenario, resilience, of course, is a topic that may mean different things to different people, but as defined in this analysis, it reflects the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adjust to changing conditions and recover after disruptive events such as flooding, hurricanes, major traffic incidents. And the intent of this scenario is to compare particular inundation areas from sea level rise projections to the proposed plan of projects to see where there might be impacts. And then funding, of course, is always a critical undercurrent in any long-range planning process, but it's been a particular emphasis area here to illustrate how alternative funding futures could potentially change the projects and the priorities included in the plan. So these futures include both an increase in revenue resources as well as looking at the outcome of lesser revenue. While the cost feasible plan generally focuses on the roadway capacity projects, which in a moment William will talk about that as part of the cost feasible plan itself, the intent and the overall effort of the TPO is to look at a comprehensive transportation network and multimodal solutions and offering transportation choices that include connected sidewalks, bike lanes, trails, transit operational improvements, and other forms of transportation to maximize efficiency and to maximize safety and access to the system. Similar to the current long-range plan that this will replace when it's fully adopted, Connect 2045 will include multimodal projects as programs, these types as particular funding set aside, so that the TPO has set aside, for example, a policy for funding that goes to bicycle and pedestrian as well as transit. So when we look at roadway projects that William will be going through, you may wonder, well, where are those other projects? Understood that those are included as part of programs, and because of the scale of how they're done, they're typically not shown in a cost feasible plan unless they rise to the level as a major project. So the next slide shows the maps that we have used for a couple of these modes. So mass transit is included here, which is showing proposed potential changes in the systems for transit, as well as the regional trails is a high-level major network that would, of course, advance the bicycle and pedestrian system in the region. So this does not preclude the fact that there will be bicycle lanes and sidewalks and other things that will be included as part of projects and to fulfill the overall bicycle and pedestrian plan. But this is to illustrate one of the major systems within this overall multimodal network. So to kind of follow up on some of what Colleen had said about environmental justice, it's very important that this plan addresses the needs of all transportation system users within this planning area. So a public involvement plan was developed to guide this plan, Connect 2045, and it recognizes the importance of ensuring that underserved and underrepresented populations are provided meaningful opportunities to provide their input. This this plan, this public involvement plan, also identifies measures such as this workshop to receive important input. So we see, especially in the wake of COVID-19, with changes that have occurred with regard to public involvement processes and the ways of receiving input. Of course, we move from a lot of face-to-face methods such as workshops and face-to-face presentations to virtual methods like this. So in a certain sense, workshop is more important than ever because of the limitations that we've faced in the past. And it also acknowledges that we see that there are challenges in these methods, but the TPO is working diligently to ensure that there is the same robust and substantive input as part of this process. So there were actually changes that were made to this plan as part of the process of planning to update in response to COVID-19. So, and understand that where we're coming to today, this public involvement plan has encompassed various pieces that have helped drive what we're talking about today. But we're in front of you at a pivotal point in this process where there's a draft set of needs, projects out there that are part of this overall plan that will help kind of guide this future, and we really want to hear from you with respect to that and the other programs. This plan was developed with many factors feeding into what was prioritized and put into the overall cost feasible plan. And among those factors is a technical criteria scoring approach that has various criteria. And among them was environmental justice criteria score. Two driving characteristics of EJ areas are the percentage of households at or below poverty level and the percentage of minority population. And so for illustration purposes, the maps that are shown here, which are also in the accompanying handout, they show the percentages of population meeting the criteria that were compared to statewide average. And these census tracts analysis estimated areas that have levels of EJ populations that were equal to or exceeded 150% of the statewide average. So again, these would be seen as areas that have call out. The areas that you know intuitively and from your own work may not be represented on these maps potentially, because sometimes it's not always able to be captured in just looking at census tracts like this. So we'll be interested to hear that as well, but we just look at this as one piece of information. So now I'm going to turn it over to William, who is going to talk about the cost feasible plan.
All right, thank you very much, Jim. Well, as part of an introduction, I like to lay out just some of the complex nature that exists within planning for the roadway transportation system. As we're driving down the road, we don't often think about who owns the road or who bears the responsibility for either maintaining or making improvements to the roadway. So as we're going through the transportation plan, the roadway network is really made up of three major layers of roadways, or different types of roadways. And those being the state strategic intermodal system, then the second being the remainder of the state highway system, and then the third component would be all the major local roads. And those are the type of roads that are contained within the long-range transportation plan. We don't get into residential streets or neighborhood streets as much when we talk about making capacity improvements. The other major concept is we've done an identification of transportation needs. So what roadway facilities are needed? If cost wasn't an issue, what would we do to build our transportation system? So that's been identified. But a big part of our focus at this point is the cost feasible projects. Those are the projects where we believe revenue is available through the year 2045 to be able to fund these improvements. So what I'd like to do in terms of the presentation at this point is now focused on the strategic intermodal system. And the way I like to characterize the strategic intermodal system is these are high priority roadways on a statewide basis. So the TPO provides guidance to the Florida Department of Transportation for which roadways are most important and valuable on this system of roadways to the DOT. And you'll see, you know, a lot of these roadways, they're the major roads. They're the interstates, you know, a road that you would likely take to drive from one end of the state to another. And because of that, they're really important on a statewide basis. So ultimately, the decision of which projects get funded is done on a statewide level. And so the projects you see on this list that are cost feasible on the strategic intermodal system, they're competing with projects in Tallahassee and Miami and Jacksonville and Tampa. And so, you know, that priority, if you will, and decision for funding happens on a statewide basis. So just to highlight some of the key improvements, the first set of cost feasible improvements are the widening of I-4 from Seminole County to State Road 472, and that includes several major interchange reconstructions at State Road 472 and Saxon Boulevard, and then the extension also of Rhode Island over towards the interstate, and that's a $944 million project, very significant undertaking. The next project is US 17 from De Leon Springs to State Road 40, and then a series of improvements on State Road 40 to a portion of it from Breakaway Trail to Williamson Boulevard, closer to Ormond Beach, widening that to 6 lanes. But then quite a bit of widening all the way from State Road 11 over to Cone Road, widening that portion to 4 lanes. That's both a capacity, but also has safety considerations as well, because currently it's much of that's a 2-lane roadway. Then there's a number of interchange improvement projects, I-95 LPGA Boulevard at US 1, and also at State Road 44. The construction of a new interchange at I-95 and Pioneer Trail. And then lastly, let's see, two last projects. One, the widening of State Road 100 up in Flagler County. And then the last project you'll see, Project K, that I-95 interchange at Maytown Road. That's a developer-funded project. And so even if the state's not funding it, if it's got a developer commitment to funding, it's something we need to recognize within the cost feasible plan. So these are for the strategic intermodal system. These are the major state roadways. These projects represent those that the state has applied funding to in their current adopted SIS cost feasible plan. Next slide, please. So there's a number of unfunded needs projects, though, on the system as well. And just to highlight, the first is the Tomoka River Bridge. And that's a roadway facility that could be funded potentially with local funding or with SIS funding. At this point, we're trying to advocate that this be a SIS improvement, because realistically, the interchange improvements at I-95 and LPGA Boulevard just aren't going to be successful without the widening of the bridge, and it's been determined that the bridge is owned by the state, and then shoulder some responsibility in terms of improvements. That's an unfunded need. Some improvements to Interstate 95, the interchange at Matanzas Wood Parkway, widening portions of Interstate 95, and widening additional portions of I-4. Those are all currently on the SIS system and are unfunded needs. Next slide, please. So then that gets us to what we call our other arterial roadways. And most of these roadways are state roadways. There are some local roadways that are critically important. One of the things with this particular state funding source, the TPO really gets to set the priority and identify which projects get funded. And there's the ability to shift some money off the state highway system onto local roadways. So the cost feasible projects included on this, and I'm going to run through these real quickly, do have this in your materials, but intersection improvements on US 1, complete street corridor type of improvements on Clyde Morris Boulevard from Belleville Road up to US 92. widening Old Kings Road up in Flagler County, widening portions of State Road 44, US 92, widening improvements, six laning improvement from the ramps from the interstate over to Tomoka Farms Road. You'll see the Tomoka River Bridge that's on there as well. We've got some funding, some local commitment funding towards that project. Again, trying to leverage investment on the SIS system, operational and intelligent transportation system improvements on US 1792 down in the southern side of DeLand, so north of Orange City and up to DeLand. Widening improvements on US 1 and State Road 415, Tomoka Farms Road down in the central part of the county. And then extension Old Kings Road, that would be the subsequent phase. And then a number of other Project Commerce Parkway, widening a portion of US 17. You'll note that this was on both the SIS list and this list, and the reason being there's sort of potential that maybe the funding might be reallocated off of that project in the SIS system. And so what we're demonstrating here is a commitment locally to provide funding to that project as a demonstration of how important that project is. And then there's some money that's boxed away for local initiatives, and that's to fund things like complete streets, transit, technology improvements. One of the things that Jim mentioned earlier is the concept of technology, and we are on the horizon both for passenger vehicles, but also transit vehicles potentially being operated with some level of autonomy, and for us really to leverage the efficient operation of vehicles in the future. The vehicles are going to need to communicate to the transportation system, and the system is going to need to communicate back. And so that would involve things like the vehicles being able to communicate to the system where are they headed, and that can allow the traffic signals to be able to adapt to knowing what those travel demands are. And then lastly, there's about just under $10 million allocated to operational improvements, so smaller intersection improvements. And one of the reasons why this was allocated is there's a lot of unfunded needs on this system. So while we might not be able to do a $40 or $120 million project to widen a roadway, we're certainly going to need to do some things maybe at some of the intersections to buy a little time in terms of being able to maintain efficient operations. I would like to comment on as appropriate on both the SIS system and on this other arterial system. Yes, these are roadway capacity improvement projects, but we do make the assumption in the urban area and articulate the need for these facilities to have appropriate context-sensitive multimodal improvements as well, be it bike lanes or sidewalk facilities on these roadways. So this is the other arterial, cost-feasible projects. If we go to the next slide, gets us into a long list of unfunded needs projects. And they include additional widening on State Road 417, State Road 11, Williamson Boulevard, Veterans Memorial Parkway, Matanzas Wood Parkway, LPGA Boulevard, some more local county projects, Hand Avenue, Josephine Street, access to the DeLand Airport, LPGA Boulevard, Dunn Avenue, Williamson Boulevard, and then Beardsford Avenue extension. Now you'll see that there's some state roadways in here, but most of these are non-state roadways. And the reason why we're highlighting them in this list is these are really, really high priorities for funding in terms of unfunded local projects. And by putting it in this table, it gives some ability for the TPO and the county to work with the Florida Department of Transportation to try and continue to secure funding while this long-range plan is in effect. Next slide, please. So then we get to the third group of roadways, and these are the other non-state major roadways. And each jurisdiction has their own funding sources that can be applied to making capacity improvements to these roadways. Oftentimes, impact fees are a significant part of these capacity improvements. And so within your materials, there is the identification of projects and anticipated time frame and budget amounts in Volusia County, which is what's reflected here. And you'll see it's divided up into 4 different geographical areas. Next slide. And then there's a whole series of unfunded needs as well in Volusia County. And the next slide. And then Palm Coast has an identification of projects as well. Many of these are going to be unfunded or subject to funding in the future based on some of those other programs I introduced earlier in the presentation. The next slide. And so that wraps it up. I'm going to hand it off.
Thank you, William. So this brings us to, the purpose of this particular workshop, and the purpose of you guys joining us today is we want to hear from you, not just on the projects that are identified in the draft cost feasible plan, but whether or not, there's any community needs or needs that populations that your agency represents that we need to be thinking about, or including, whether it's including in this plan or identifying it for a future study that we need to look at. Are there deficiencies in the transportation network that provides challenges for your agency and the populations that you represent to access things like jobs or healthcare or healthy food? So is there anything that you feel is missing or that you would like to change about this plan? As well as, is there any additional thing that is important for us to consider, as we develop this plan?